welcome to Zoom with Czarny. I'm Dustin Czarny, Democratic Elections Commissioner for Onondaga County. Today is Thursday, January 12th, and welcome to my interview show. On today, I have Jeff Wice of New York Law University. He is an expert on redistricting. We have a great discussion about what is happening with assembly redistricting, other redistricting issues, and what we can look forward to redistricting this year, since redistricting will always be with us. So check that out. Longtime viewers and listeners to the program may see that I have a new theme song coming into Zoom with Czarny. Don't worry, I still love Tub Thumping by Chumbawamba, my favorite all-time song of all time, and my theme song. And it still will continue to be my theme song. But I have switched over to Ode to Joy by Beethoven for a very simple reason. I've noticed that some Zoom views have gone down for my Zoom with Czarnys, whereas my commissioner and cars are not, and that's because copyright claims are on Tub Thumping with Chumbawamba, both on Facebook and YouTube. So I'm checking out this new royalty-free public domain song. I also love Ode to Joy, and maybe some people may not remember this, but former Governor Mario Cuomo, after he left office in 1994, in 1995, had a brief stint on public radio, or I'm not even sure whether it's public radio or not. He had a radio show on talk radio, and his theme song was Ode to Joy, something that I loved, something I learned to play on guitar for a little bit when I was going through a phase of learning guitar, and so this is still actually a song that I definitely identify with, but don't worry, I still can't get knocked down. I'll still get up again, and you'll still never keep me down. So Tub Thumping is still here, but I'm trying something new because I wanted people to see these programs. These interview programs that I have with these guests are very good, and I hope maybe that might change, and the copyright claims and the viewership will go up. We got to play the social media game. 2 years in, I'm finally learning how to do that. So that being said, I'm very happy to have my next guest, Jeff Wice, professor at New York Law University and expert on redistricting statewide, nationwide, and a great discussion on what's going on with assembly redistricting and other redistricting cases throughout New York State. And I'm back with my good friend, Jeff Wice of New York Law School. Jeff Wice is one of the foremost experts on redistricting. We've had him on our program here several times talking about local redistricting, state redistricting. Jeff, thank you very much for coming back on.
Pleasure to be back.
So, Jeff, just in case people are seeing this for the first time, give people a little background into who you are and what and your background and how you've kind of become known as the guru on redistricting in New York.
Well, way back in the 1970s, when I used to represent the New York State Assembly in Washington, D.C., I was sent out to the Census Bureau to find out what's this all about, redistricting, the census, because the Democrats who I worked for in the Assembly had never controlled the process since literally 1911 for one brief year. And I went out to the Census Bureau, got involved in Census 1980. I was in law school at the time. New York lost 5 congressional districts, and the late Speaker Stanley Fink from the Assembly put me in the catbird seat at a very young age to negotiate out the loss of 5 congressional districts. I survived that and went on to work with the Democratic National Committee. I worked for states, localities across the country, for the State Assembly 1980 through 2000, State Senate 2010. Did some work with the Assembly last year, but essentially do my work now out of New York Law School, where I work with counties, towns, cities on election law issues, redistricting, voting rights, census. And I'm now looking to help New York avoid the loss of more congressional districts after 2030. That's a decade-long effort, and we're just getting underway now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's and I do think that there's some evidence that we got kind of lucky, although we lost a seat, and maybe we were unlucky because we only lost it by 81 81 persons to Minnesota, but there is some evidence that there was some major undercounting in other states, whereas actually New York did pretty good this time.
Yeah, well, the problem now is that under the 2022 census state estimates, New York is now projected to lose 2 districts after 2030. So to go from losing 5 nearly 50 years ago, 3 districts in 1990, 2 districts each in 2000 and 2010, and just 1 district in 2020. Going back up this, the ladder again to losing 2 districts is not good. For New York, it's not good at all for public policy or the strength of our state nationally.
Yeah. So you hear it here first, New Yorkers. Go out and be fruitful and multiply, as Ben Franklin said. We have to, but you're right. I think a part of that is obviously we need to stop the population decline in New York State, but also we need to attract more people to come.
People also have to understand that the census is not just a once in a decade thing, but it's used every day to decide where hospitals and grocery stores are located, how much money to put into school districts, how much money to put into senior centers, how much money go to roads. And look outside your window. Everything that government impacts is somehow connected to the census. So when you get your American Community Survey census form, which goes out to a quarter of the households on a rotating basis, all the nitty-gritty of socioeconomic questions, people need to respond to that. So if you get that form, send it back completed.
Yeah, and the census is ongoing, but also seems to be redistricting seems to be ongoing.
Now, people used to say, oh, you're back again. It's at the beginning of the decade. Now it's ongoing, and there's no real end in sight, at least for the better part of 2023. As far as the state assembly goes, there's still a lot more work ahead of us.
And that's what I wanted to bring you on to talk about, because I think everybody thinks that the Senate and congressional lines are set, although we'll talk about that a little bit later too, whether that is actually the case or not. But the ongoing case, the one that is right in the middle, right coming up on this highway of redistricting as we travel down this road, is the assembly maps. They were not touched in the previous lawsuit. But why don't you give us a little background on what's going on with the New York assembly maps?
Well, last year, after the State Court of Appeals was only able to invalidate the congressional and Senate map because the assembly map had not been challenged, after that decision came down, a group of people went to court in New York County, Manhattan, filed a lawsuit saying the assembly lines were just as bad as the Senate and congressional lines. Judge, invalidate them and get them redrawn. So what a judge did in New York County was to invalidate the assembly plan enacted last year, and he ordered the so-called State Independent Redistricting Commission to go back to work, to start from scratch, hold hearings, and send one plan to the legislature for the assembly only, let them vote on it. If that's rejected, a second plan. That was what the problem happened last year, was that the commission failed to send back a second plan after the first was rejected by the Assembly and the Senate. So hearings just started this week on Monday, Tuesday. They were in Buffalo. They were in Rochester. There are hearings next week in Syracuse and Albany. They'll go all the way through March 1st to covering the Hudson Valley, New York City, the downstate suburbs. And then by April 28th, the commission is supposed to go back to the legislature with one plan, hopefully not 2 plans, but a plan that the legislature can vote on, either accept it, and if the governor approves it, it's over. But if the legislature rejects that plan, then the commission goes back to the drawing board, holds hearings again, develops a second set of maps, sends them to the legislature. This could happen by May, June. The legislature's in session until June, but that's beyond the scope of us knowing now. But if a second plan is rejected, then the legislature could draw a plan of its own. Now, unlike last year, we're not under any tight time frame because petitioning doesn't start for 2024 elections until late February, early March 2024. So this could be a very short process. It could be over by April, or it could be a longer process and take any amount of time through 2023. That we don't know yet. And that case also, by the way, the decision to let the commission go back to work is being appealed to the appellate division, and there's a hearing on that question next Tuesday. And of course, whatever happens with that decision, either let the commission continue its work, or no, it can't continue its work, and the court will draw the new plan. That goes to the State Court of Appeals. And of course, we don't have a chief judge right now, which is the center of a whole different controversy. Last year, the former chief judge, Janet DiFiore, wrote the majority decision on a 4-3 vote that invalidated the Senate and congressional map. And whoever her successor is may have a different view of how redistricting should take place.
So you know what? I didn't realize that wrinkle there about it, the appellate division hearing that next week. So not having a confirmed justice in the Court of Appeals for the chief judge of the Court of Appeals, that's not going to affect that hearing. It'll affect the hearing that happens.
The next hearing,
yeah,
and that could take place conceivably sometime mid to late February. It's always hard to know once a court has an oral argument how soon they're going to decide the case. It could be a day, it could be a week or 2 weeks, but once you start submitting the paperwork to the next level up, the Court of Appeals, that could take some time as well. And again, we're not on a fast track like we were last year. They could take some more time.
So, but we do have an acting chief judge. And so conceivably, if the LaSalle nomination, and I'm neutral on that, just got to put that out there right away. But I'm just talking what ifs. If the LaSalle nomination is not accepted or drags on, the acting chief judge would maybe have to hear this Court of Appeals decision.
Right, but that's also where the court, let's see, there's 7 members. It could tie 3-3 and uphold whatever, leave in place whatever the appellate division decides. And of course, we have to wait and see what that is.
Right, yeah. So even the fact that the State Redistricting Commission, I won't call it independent because I don't believe it is, but the State Redistricting Commission is now redrawing the maps. That work could get stopped at any time.
It could, but usually if the appellate division stops that work and then it's appealed to the State Court of Appeals, that decision could be, as they call it, stayed and put on hold until the next level hears the case. So we're on a bit of a roller coaster ride here.
All right. So let's assume, though, that the independent, I said it. I can't believe I said it. The
so-called independent
Redistricting Commission, the State Redistricting Commission, does get to continue to do its work. They release some draft maps. Now they have public hearings on those draft maps. And then at some point, the Assembly, and I'm glad you pointed that out, it's only the Assembly that has to vote on this. Is that correct?
No, the Assembly bill still has to go to the Assembly and the Senate.
Okay.
Approval. But the Senate really doesn't have a horse to ride here. Their lines are set. So, I don't see a reason why the Senate would vote no on it. But this is the first time in state history that this situation has developed. But there's no reason for the state Senate, to try to nix the Assembly plan. There's too many other issues they can fight over than something where they have no vested interest.
Right. So it goes to the Assembly. Now, it's important to know that, and maybe I'm wrong here, but the commission, or I'm sorry, the judge in Manhattan, they did not find the maps to be unconstitutional in and of themselves. Just the process for adopting.
That's correct. And it's an interesting point because in so many of the statements presented to the commission this week in Buffalo and Rochester, many witnesses said, the plan that was enacted last year that we used for November elections, that's a pretty good map. Leave it in place. Don't change the map that we already have in, that we're familiar with, that we've elected representatives to serve in Albany, that, serve us well already. There's no need to change anything. And it's not inconceivable that regardless of what the commission does, the legislature can still come back and put that same plan back in place and enact it procedurally, legally, unlike how it was unprocedurally illegal, but the merits of the lines themselves were voted on with bipartisan support by Democrats and Republicans in the Assembly. So it was a bipartisan plan. It left most incumbents in place. It created equally populated districts statewide from Buffalo to Suffolk, unlike past decades where some districts were overpopulated or underpopulated for partisan reasons. The districts pretty much fell into equal population. So the plan that was invalidated was only invalidated for procedural purposes, reasons, not for substantive ones.
It's again, that's exactly what I was leading to, is that since the assembly was all had the last session's assembly voted on this plan and became bipartisan. The court ruled that this plan was not unconstitutional, just the procedure was unconstitutional, so they sent it back to the IRC. The IRC puts in one plan, the assembly could reject it. Then the IRC will have to put in a second plan, and the assembly could reject that and put the same exact plan up. And this assembly were all elected on that plan, so they have a vested interest to put that plan back up. By the letter of the ruling so far in the court procedure, that seems to solve the constitutional issue. So
it would. And also keep in mind that even though the lines were drawn by the Democrats with Republican support, Republicans still picked up a few districts off that map in November. They knocked off longtime incumbent Democrats in the Hudson Valley, on Long Island. So that plan served the Republicans pretty well. They didn't break the Democrats' supermajority, but it was not a bad plan for them. And it's even important to note that had the congressional plan that was invalidated as being a partisan gerrymander, if that plan had been used in November, Democrats would still have lost districts in the Hudson Valley and on Long Island. Like where George Santos won, that district would have gone Republican had the shorefront district that the Democrats drew that went from Suffolk all the way to the Connecticut line along the Long Island Sound. That district would have elected a Republican. So much for this egregiously partisan map.
Right. And that's the state Senate map, and the congressional map is what you're talking about there.
Right.
One last point on the assembly case. What do you think is the likelihood? A lot of Republicans that were part of the redistricting case have thrown out this theory that that if a new map is adopted, it's not the same map, or even if the same map is adopted, that a second primary will be ordered in August again this year, and that will have a one.
The judge already ruled that the new map will not be used, is not needed until 2024.
So no chance of ruining my summer this year is what you're trying
not
to
yet. Not so far.
Okay, good. Because that was tough. This receding hairline is August of 2022. That's what that is right there. So that's good to hear. And I also think it's good for the voters, because it's confusing to have so many different elections, and then to have an election this year for assembly and next year for assembly. I know that happened in 1955 with the state Senate maps, but that is that's good news to hear. So is there anything as part of this ruling that, since the IRC is now reformed, in order to be reformed, could they then go ahead and actually draw state Senate and congressional maps as a plan?
No, They can't do that. That is not part of their mandate from the court. As far as the state courts are concerned, congressional and state Senate redistricting is a closed book for the decade. There is a case that tried to reopen congressional redistricting. It was rejected. It's on appeal, but for the last 4 or 5 months, it hasn't gone anywhere. Now, to put an entirely different spin on the entire question, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to decide a case coming out of North Carolina that argues that state courts cannot play a role in federal elections where the U.S. Constitution directs that task to the state legislature. It's called the independent legislature theory. And if the Republicans get what they want, and no one thinks they're going to win on this entirely, would mean that the state court in New York cannot reject a state legislatively enacted congressional plan. But if that does happen, and it's a long shot at this point, we won't know until probably June, then somebody can go to court all over again and say, well, state courts now have no role in congressional redistricting because only the legislatures can do that, for Congress only, not the legislature, but the Congress. Then let's have the state legislature go back and redraw the congressional plan, let the Democrats do what they want. That's a whole other ballgame. We should talk about that end of the year, but I doubt that's going to happen, but never say never.
So, right. So state Senate maps, absolutely door closed. These are the maps until 2030.
I would put some safe money on that with a small, tiny little question mark on Congress, but not to worry much about it.
So moving on, redistricting doesn't just happen on the state level or the federal level. We have local redistricting. Viewers of this program know that Onondaga County is going through a court case right now. They may know where that is. And I'll be honest, we're waiting for rulings from a judge on a procedural question there. And then we'll be moving on, hopefully, to the merits. I'm a plaintiff in that case, so we're not going to talk too much about that case on this recording. But it's not the only local redistricting case going on through New York. And the Skoufis Paulin bill that brought statewide redistricting formulas to local formulas. There's been a couple of cases that have happened throughout the state on local redistricting. Can you talk a little bit about those? And I'm specifically thinking about Broome, Ulster, Monroe, and Buffalo. Those are the
sure. Just to walk through those quickly. The first one, Broome County, the county legislature enacted a county legislative plan that violated criteria included in a bill that Governor Hochul approved in October 2021, essentially requiring that districts follow criteria, a ban on partisan gerrymandering, a limit on splitting towns and villages, a tighter population deviation limit than had been previously allowed on the size of the largest to smallest districts. But in a nutshell, a state judge in Broome County ruled a few weeks ago that the county legislature made two mistakes. First, it failed to use reallocated prisoner data, where prisoners are counted for redistricting, not at the prisons, but at their homes of record prior to incarceration. And the county failed to use that database. That's been a law on the books for 12 years now. But then as a result of that, the population deviation, or the size of the smallest to largest district, exceeded 5%. It was more like 6%. So the court said, there's a limit of 5%. You didn't meet that limit. Go back and redraw the plan. And that's being appealed now. But it was a victory for the plaintiffs. In Ulster County, something similar happened. A commission was tasked with redrawing their county legislature, and they didn't even know about the new state law. I got a phone call about it from a local supervisor, and I asked to look at the map, and I told him, look, your plan doesn't meet the requirements of the state law. It's illegal. Lawyers went to court, and there a state judge said again, you didn't follow the law. It's not even debatable. You didn't follow the rules. You exceeded the 5% limit. So the just before New Year's, the commission went back to work, redrew a plan. I believe the judge will consider that plan and dismiss that case, but it was a victory for the plaintiffs that you can't ignore the new state law. In Monroe County, we had an issue where the local Republicans teamed up with some of the minority groups and decided that they wanted 5 minority districts that were packed with as many Black voters as possible. That would have violated the U.S. Constitution because you could have created 6 districts without unnecessarily packing all the Black voters into fewer districts. So the county executive vetoed that plan. 2 court cases were filed, and eventually, just before New Year's, the Republican group, the county executive, negotiated, compromised, but came out with a 6-district plan, 6 minority districts rather than 5. Caveat, I was serving as a legal advisor to the county executive, but that was decided out of court and amicably. The other case we have outside of, let's see, we have Broome County, also City of Buffalo. There, the city was taken to court over the failure to follow the city charter rules on how to implement a plan through public hearings, public outreach, that it was a rushed plan. But the judge there rejected the plan, the challenge rather, and said that the plaintiffs did not meet any levels of proof that the county had to hold more than 1 or 2 hearings or had to do more than what the charter required. What the plaintiffs did not challenge were the merits of the plan, whether it violated the law. So they're going back to the starting gate and likely refiling the case, not based on process where they can't win, but based on minority voting rights problems and criteria issues that are much more substantive.
Yeah, I mean, all these cases are showing that the Skoufis-Poland bill that applied state redistricting criteria to local redistricting is actually being paid attention to.
It is.
That people are they are successful in court in bringing it when the violations happen, and that that it is protecting local localities, even though not all of the cases are going to.
I mean, one thing we learned from a conservative state court of appeals in the state case, the Harkenrider case, was that the court honed in on just one criteria: not favoring or disfavoring a political party or candidates, a ban on partisan gerrymandering. And although some people read that as the court misread the Constitution, that it was one of several criteria they took out of context, it pretty much puts a warning into everyone's minds that if you go overboard on being greedy for either party, then you're likely to end up in court and lose, even if you think rationally you did nothing wrong. Also interesting in Suffolk County, where you have an 18-member county legislature, Democrats proposed a 9 Democrat, 9 Republican fair fight plan. Republicans came in with a 13 Republican, 7 Democratic plan, and they were at stalemate for months at a commission. Finally, the Republicans realized if we go to court, we're going to lose. And they negotiated down to a 9-9 fair fight plan. So in some instances, a fair plan could get through.
Right. I mean, it's some successful cases that are going to cost counties a lot of money. Yeah. That will be especially when we get into 2030. I think when in that round of redistricting, then the people who are losing in court right now are going to remember that, and they're going to come back with better plans before.
We're going to see the next fight in Nassau County, where the Republicans for years have advocated very partisan plans. They have a hearing Tuesday in Mineola, and we'll see what the Republicans do there next.
Right. Yeah. And then, of course, we're waiting for what happens here. I'll tell you one place that is not getting into court is Syracuse truly independent redistricting plan that went before the Common Council. That was not challenged, is not being challenged. In fact, people are running on the lines and people are very excited about the new districts because they make sense. And I think we're going to see a bumper crop of new people running in those areas, and I think I'm really excited about that. So Jeff, we're getting on that half-hour mark, and I'm always, I think that's about the sweet spot for this podcast. But I always like to end with what haven't we talked about? What is out there, redistricting or political news, that you think is something that people should be paying attention to?
Well, the one thing everyone should know about, start thinking about, in July of this year, a new state law takes effect, the John R. Lewis New York State Voting Rights Act. And one of the provisions in that bill urges that districts be created. This is a redistricting angle, that if you could take a Black and Hispanic different communities and put them together in one district, even if the Blacks or Hispanics by themselves under the federal law aren't enough to create a majority. Under state law, you can start seeing new challenges brought later this year against counties, towns, cities that didn't consider what we call coalition districts of Black and Hispanic or other kinds of combinations of minority groups and districts. I'm not sure where that'll take place yet, but I've been telling all the governments I've been working for, including the city of Syracuse, that if you can create a coalition district, you should do so to avoid prolonging redistricting yet 2 or 3 more years.
All right. Well, that is definitely something to think about. That is, thank you, Jeff, for being a friend of the pod and coming on and giving your time, and of course all the time you give across the state, fighting the good fight for fair districts and educating the public on this and the census. I'm sure I'll have you on again once the assembly maps are adopted, and we can talk about the resolution of that case and maybe some others. All right.
Looking forward to that. Thanks very much.
And that was my interview with Jeff Wice of New York Law University. A great interview as always. He's an excellent guest. Tune in next week. I will have a new guest on Zoom with Czarny, a first-time guest, Alec Lewis. Alec used to work for the New York State Democrats and on the New York Senate Democrats. I got to know him through that, and he's recently left that job to become a lobbyist with O'Donnell and Associates. He's an expert on state politics. We're talking about the state of the state and Democracy Day that happened this week. We'll be talking about that next week on Zoom with Czarny. Commissioner in the car next week. I'll be coming to you from my hotel room in Hilton, Albany. Don't worry, nothing lewd. Just I'll be doing it from there because I won't have a car because I'll be at the New York State Elections Commissioner Winter Conference. And that's our training session that happens in winter. So we'll be talking about updates from there. And Weekly Wonk will continue this weekend. I will be doing Election Day and Election Turnout Part 2 and my final part of my general election look back for this year. So check that out. And in the ending, you may notice another change in song. And that's because I'm going to do another part of Ode Joy. I'm replacing the song Zavicha Czarny. Probably did not know what that was. But Zavicha Czarny is a Polish song and also my personal hero, a knight. Go check that out. You can Google it. You'll see. He's a pretty cool dude. Or go to my website and you can see one of the posts I wrote about him. Check that out as well. All right. But we're out. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.